And when you look at what is most important to the user base, the first one is reliability. And what is interesting with reliability is that with data integration, it is that it's a 1,000 paper cut problem. We already have a bigger footprint than Fivetran just in 2 years because we're open source. We have a lot more companies using us. That means we are exposed to a lot more use cases.
Hello, everyone. Lafleur here. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Demohub episode. Today, we have a very fascinating guest joining us. I was so excited to connect and to have him join us for the show today to do a demo. We have John. John, welcome to the show.
Hi, Fru. Thanks for having me.
So glad to have you, John. For the folks out there who don't know you, can you talk a little bit about yourself?
I'm a serial entrepreneur, but it's my fourth startup. And I was exposed to data integration in my third startup. And we had to build data integration pipelines, and we completely underestimated the work to be done and the maintenance, especially. And so that's when I was like, I got my scars on data integration, and I knew that was a problem space that needed solving. And that's how the trigger for Airbyte, actually. Yeah.
Okay, really cool. And what is Airbyte for the folks that haven't heard about what the product is?
So Airbyte is a data movement platform. We have an open source approach to enabling you to replicate your data from all your APIs, databases, files to your data warehouse, data lake, or databases. We're starting with ELT. That's how the market calls it. And later on, we'll also do reverse TL, meaning once you have consolidated that data in your warehouse or database, at that point, you want to sync that data back to your tool like Salesforce. And so we call it data activation on our side. And we intend to do that as well. So that's why we're saying data movement, because it's both ELT, reverse TL, and later on we'll do also streaming.
Oh, okay. So if you think about the folks that invest in new product like Snowflake, they would want to look at Airbyte to bring in that data into those platforms. Is that correct?
Exactly, because so when you buy typically Snowflake, you will need to get your data in Snowflake. At that point, you need to look at the tool like an ELT tool, and you have solutions, Fivetran, for instance, but Fivetran is closed source and cloud hosted, meaning that they do everything in house, and they only support 170 connectors with limited customizability. And Airbyte has an open source approach, meaning that we'll address a long tail of connectors through the community. Already, the last 80 connectors that were built, I would say 80% come from the community already. So we'll have eventually thousands of connectors. We already have 185 in less than 2 years. And especially because those connectors are open source, that means you have full customizability of them. And Airbyte also works very well with the rest of the stack. So we integrate with dbt, Airflow, Daxter, Prefect, all of those tools. So that means because your data architecture infrastructure needs to be custom, but it's a really good player for that.
Hmm. Wow, that's really cool. I think you've touched on a couple of things there that I wanna dive in a little bit deeper and unpack. You've talked about open source. You've talked about lots of connectors that you support. You've talked about the orchestration side of things. So let's just walk through those pieces because and just for the audience, I'm sure a lot of folks that have watched on this channel they know I have a very strong data integration background. I did spend a couple of years in that space, so very attuned with what's going on. And it's a space that has a lot of competitions, a lot of tools playing out in that space. And I'm sure as the co-founder, there is a reason why we need one more data integration
Yeah.
tool. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So let's say you use, for instance, Fivetran today.
Mm,
So you will use actually Fivetran only for your most common APIs. As soon as you've got some custom needs on those APIs, even like for Salesforce, at that
mm,
point, you will need to build an internal data engineering team to build custom in-house scripts. If you have also the need for long tail connectors that are not supported by Fivetran, same, you will need an in-house data engineering team to build those scripts.
mhm,
And finally, the last point is for high volume databases. All the current ELT tools, their pricing is on rows.
mhm,
And in your Postgres, you can have like hundreds of millions of rows or billions of rows. And at
mhm,
that point, the pricing doesn't work. It's not compatible. So again, what we see often is that companies will use several systems and build their own with data engineering teams to avoid that pricing. And with Airbyte, those connectors that you have at your disposal are open source. So you have extreme customizability. Plus, we have a CDK, a connector development kit that enables you
Okay.
to build a connector in within 1-2 hours instead of 2 days. And you have the
Mm-hmm.
full community there that can help you maintain it. So
Mm-hmm.
the goal is that you won't need to use a separate system at all for your custom or long tail needs. And
Mm-hmm.
our pricing model for Airbyte Cloud is compute based. And databases, they replicate at 20 times the speed of APIs. So that becomes possible again. And the goal with Airbyte is that instead of using one ELT tool plus having data engineering teams to do the rest, you just
Mm-hmm.
use Airbyte for everything. And that's why we've got that much traction. We started in July 2020. We've got
Mm-hmm.
already more than 20,000 companies that have seen data with us. And we are, I think, 1,800 companies are using it daily on open
Mm-hmm.
source in a prod environment because they
Okay.
don't want to have like data engineering teams
Yeah.
spending like work they don't like doing. Like
Mm-hmm.
building
Wow.
and maintaining connectors is the worst job you can ask to a data engineer.
Yeah, I could imagine. And congrats, by the way, on that success, 2020 starting, and it seems like you're getting a lot of traction in the market. So that's really cool. And I think with this data integration space, the value you get from the tools you select usually comes down to the connectivity or the connectors that are supported, right? Because that's one of
Yep.
the first questions that folks always ask. Do you have a connector to this marketing system? Do you have a connector to this API? Do you have a connector to this ERP system or to this database? And the sense I'm getting is that your approach of open source is really to democratize access to creating those connectors at scale more so than you trying to make that more proprietary. Is that really the thinking behind that?
Yeah, so the goal is that in 2 years' time, even like less, we'll be at 1,000 connectors. And the
Mm-hmm.
long tail would be maintained also by the community. We would really want to solve that problem so that data engineers can focus on something that is more rewarding than
Mm-hmm.
moving data.
Okay, that's really cool. And you did mention there is an open source version to this, and then is there like a hosted version for Airbyte for the folks that don't want to install or
Yes.
manage infrastructure or Docker containers? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So we have a Airbyte open source. The first version was released in October 2020. And we have a first version of the Airbyte Cloud. Airbyte Cloud, and it was released 2 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
So the difference between Airbyte Cloud and Airbyte Open Source is that it's also cloud hosted and managed by us. So you don't need to do anything on that. But you also have user access management. The fees that we have is that any features that helps the company or the team at that point would be in cloud, not the open source version. So you have user access management, you've got SSO, SAML, all the features that enterprise
Mm-hmm.
need, these kind of things. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But
And
if you
yeah,
need
go
to
ahead.
move data from point A to point B, though, the Byte open source will do the job.
Okay, that's very cool. But there is parity in terms of the connectors across.
We by the end of the year there will be. Today, Byte Cloud is still a bit behind, but by the end of
Mhm.
the year there will be parity.
Okay, and you did mention the CDK. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So our connector development kit
Mm-hmm.
is it's like a SDK if you want to SDK for connectors,
Mm-hmm.
and we standardize the way. So 80% of when you're building a connector, 80% is actually common to every connector
Mm-hmm.
in the end. So we just make that like in a
Templatize it
box,
in
yeah,
some way. Mm-hmm.
so that you can only focus on what is really custom and unique to your connector. So you've
Mm-hmm.
got 20% of the job to be done. And right now it's 1 to 2 hours to create a connector. Our moonshot is to really be at 15, 30 minutes with even like some very low code or no code way to build a connector for 80% of the case. When you
Mm-hmm.
go to edge case, that's where you need code in any case.
Oh, okay, that's really interesting. And this reminds me of, you familiar with Stitch Data?
Yep.
Yeah, Stitch that got acquired by Talent, and I believe there was a project they had with Singer for
Mhm.
also building connectors. Is the team
No,
contributing to that, or is
no.
it a different project?
A different project altogether. What happened with Singer is that there was no standardization at all.
Mhm,
So now every connector that was created by a community member, it was its own open source project in the end, and there was the only
mhm,
ones really maintaining it. So out of I think they have 180 or a bit more
Mm-hmm.
connectors, and that only 30, 40 are really maintained. The rest are just out of date. And with our CDK, the goal is really to standardize the way connectors are being built and also maintained, so that in the end, we have all out of the 200 connectors, or later on 500 or 1,000 connectors, most of them are really up to date and work out of the box. That's our goal.
Mm-hmm.
So standardization is key, and that's why
Mm-hmm.
we couldn't leverage a Singer for that. It didn't invite standardization at all.
Okay, that definitely makes sense. And then from a source perspective, I'm guessing all the traditional RDBMSs and for legacy enterprises, you're thinking about like ERP systems and CRM systems. All of those would have connectors
Later on, yes.
later on.
Later on, yeah. We're not focusing on them yet. I would
Mm-hmm.
say our focus right now is like the large Postgres databases. If you have
Mm-hmm.
got a 1 terabyte, but eventually if you've got 10 terabyte or 100 terabyte, it should work with Airbyte. And we're focusing not definitely not on bare metal. We're focusing on virtual private cloud. So when you say you're like
Mm-hmm.
your on premise will be more like in your virtual private cloud,
Yep.
more than bare metal. And but yes, we'll come to that. The goal is that we are really agnostic in terms of connectors. That's the goal.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a question of timing.
Okay, really cool. And then also from an orchestration perspective, is can you talk about the orchestration or the schedulers you have and how you integrate with the broader ecosystem? Because data integration, which I believe is the space you play in, is kind of like glue that touches everything, right? You're touching the sources, you're touching the data warehousing. If you're talking about reverse ETL, you're touching downstream applications, you're
Yeah.
touching orchestration and DevOps and data ops. How do you integrate it with all of that?
So you can leverage Airbyte through our UI, like,
Mm-hmm.
or you have also an API or a CLI. Right now, the API and CLI are only available in open source. They will be available in cloud in Q3 2022, so like next quarter as
Mm-hmm.
well. So at that point, you can leverage Airflow, Dagster, Prefect if you want, and just trigger sync, extract, load, and sync. That's if you use the API and CLI. But we also offer integrations to those orchestrators. So you can really just like we have tutorials for that. You can find on our website, and you can
Mm-hmm.
leverage Airflow to use Airflow to trigger syncs on Airbyte. Once the job is done or has failed, then you continue with your DAG. And otherwise, you are also able to use Airbyte without any orchestrators, meaning that you can set up a sync every 5 minutes, every like 1 hour, something like
Mm-hmm.
this. You have some control right from Airbyte's UI already.
Okay, really good. And then what about the transformations? So I'm guessing if you're thinking about the EL,
Yeah.
once the EL is done, there's gonna have to be the T that comes in
Yeah.
after the fact.
So the way we think about it is that in open source, you want to be the best at something. And for us,
Mm-hmm.
DBT is the best at transformation. And so
Mm-hmm.
we will never do transform. We want to be like best friends with DBT. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
why we are offering like integrations to DBT. We'll have integration with DBT Cloud like within 3 months. And so the goal is that you do EL using Airbyte, you put that in your Snowflake, for instance, and at that point you can have DBT, use DBT for transformation. With our integration with DBT open source, you can trigger like a transformation from our UI directly just after the sync is done. So we do some orchestration on the transformation.
Okay, really good. And then before we get into the demo, I know a lot of folks are always excited about the demo part of this. Can you talk a little bit as a founder, a serial entrepreneur, haven't done this many times, what it means to build a product and also a community here? Because it seems like you're not just building a tool, you actually, and I was
Yeah.
looking at your GitHub activity, your Slack channel is very active. It seems like there's also a community that has to be built along with the product. Can you talk a little bit about that journey and what you've learned from that?
So our vision is what we say community. Being able to address long tail is through the community. So we knew that we wanted to be community first and build the community from the get-go. So the way we've been thinking about it is that we wanted like full transparency with our community. So at the beginning we had only one Slack where the whole team was, and it was open to the community, and then enabled
Mm-hmm.
and so transparency on our vision. And we had also we felt that we wanted buy-in from that vision. You need to express a great vision that people will believe in, and address like fully solving data integration is a huge challenge, but that's something you want to believe that one day it will be solved. The last part is showing velocity. So every week on our Slack, you could see every week we were shipping. And I think that get us a lot of trust from the community and goodwill. And that's how we got more and more contributors in the end. And now we're so thankful to have this community, and they are part and parcel of our full vision and our roadmap, product roadmap, which is public as well. So
Oh wow, that's very cool, and congrats for that. So let's dive into the demo to
yeah,
showcase what Airbyte looks like for folks who haven't seen in action.
okay.
You can share your screen, and I'll bring it up to the screen.
Okay. Just so you know, we actually have a demo. If you go on our website and scroll down here, you have access to demo app. It will be read only, but you can play with the interface and see how it
Okay.
goes. Um, here I'm going to show you an account that we use for demos to show you the states. We have 3 connections here. So a connection is a source and a destination, and like this is manual frequency. So you can launch like just right now if you want to. And we wanted to show you like 3 cases: when it's failing, when it's successful, and when was it's paused. And you can unpause it just by clicking here. So let's go on also on, for instance, GitHub. This one is successful. So you can see every 24 hours, the sync is being triggered. And you have access to the logs, you can download anything. And you can change the frequency, you can uh, decide what prefix you want and the structure of the data. Does it replicate exactly the source, or is the one on destination, so mirror source structure, for instance? And here, what is interesting is that you can select any data, any stream that you want to replicate. And we will offer you full refresh, but also we'll offer you incremental when we have a primary key available. So
Okay.
what is interesting is here we are not opinionated, meaning that we'll try to offer you all streams, while some other solutions, for instance, Fivetran, I will only offer you the API streams where you have incremental, because I only do incremental. So you'll have access to more streams through Airbyte, because we're not opinionated. So you can either append or overwrite. Overwrite meaning you just replace the data at the end. Or append, you put it at the bottom of the table at the destination. And for
So
instance, yes, go on.
yeah, so this is really good, and I love this. So, when I think about this, I think of three things: creating
Yep,
a connection,
yep,
and then creating a destination. So,
yep,
can you just maybe walk through what that experience
yep.
for creating a connection for a new source that a user might want to bring in?
Okay. You can either well, let's say you can create a source first. At that point, you select, we have a bunch of what we call GA connectors and beta connectors and alpha connectors. And for instance, you want to create Google Sheets. So when we have all that is available, you can just authenticate and you have access to it.
And
That's
you
the
add, oh,
easy.
okay, that's very simple. And a
Yeah.
GA alpha beta connector, what are the differences between that? Is it just based on what the community provides versus what has
So
been reviewed and
so
verified?
we a GA connector is a connector for which we will provide an SLA.
Okay.
A beta connector is a connector that has an SLO and is on track to become a GA connector.
Okay.
And an alpha connector, we haven't gotten it to beta state yet.
All right.
So our whole team is focusing on migrating all our connectors to beta and GA. We're not building any connectors yet anymore on our side. The community is doing that very well. And we're trying to find ways actually to have the community help us on that journey of bringing all those connectors to GA. But for instance, let's say you want something that's Alpha Postgres, and the Postgres like source should become GA by next month, so 2022. And you can
Okay.
see for Postgres, yeah, it's going to be harder. You have a lot more fields to actually fill. You'll be able also, you can choose like CDC, same
Okay.
at that point.
Um.
And so depending on your source, you have different like fields to fill.
All right. Really, really good. And I think you were showing this a little bit earlier. If you choose CDC, so it
Yeah.
basically change data capture, then you want, are you going by log-based replication, or are you going to be using, say, a key on the table to figure out those
Log-based
changes?
replication,
It's
indeed.
log-based. Okay.
Yeah. And same for, so let's say same for destinations. So you can create your own destinations. At that point, so when you create a connection, you can either select an existing source. So let's say I want MSQL, or I can set up a new source from it directly. I can select a destination. Let's say I want Snowflake. At that point, we'll check if the source is well configured. Same for the destination before it lets you select exactly which streams you want to sync.
Okay.
So it may take a minute, it may take a bit less, it depends. Right now, it depends also, especially on the source. So that's what we're seeing right now.
Okay. So this is good. And how is that data getting to the destination? Are you instantiating the schemas, or is it coming as a JSON that needs to be flattened out on the destination side for
I
schema
think
evolution?
so schema evolution is coming actually next month. So it's coming
Okay.
very, very soon. And I'll be like, you'll see, you'll learn a lot more then. But we'll have schema evolution at that point. But yeah, you can see like we
Okay,
can
got it.
see some normalization
Got it.
here.
Yeah, okay. That's really cool. You can normalize it, or I could see some folks like in the JSON, because then they can just have their schema evolution embedded in there. But what you're saying is, even on the normalized side, you're gonna handle the schema evolution to change the schemas as it goes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really, really
And
good.
so you set up your connection, or when it's done, just set up your connection. And then here by default, it's every 24 hours, and it will just trigger a sync. What could be interesting to see, sometimes it might fail. So what happens when it fails? Here, what we're doing is we're doing 3 attempts. Every time it fails, we're doing 3 attempts. And you have access to the logs, and you have like here in Intercom chat for the cloud version. And I think the time to first answer is 4 minutes in average. So you get very easy reply. You can download the logs and just share it there, and we'll help you. So
Good.
that's for the cloud version. For the open
Okay.
source version, we also have a discourse. And that discourse, you can just check for existing issues, if they already exist, or just post it in troubleshooting, and it will help you there.
Okay. Really, really good. I think support usually is especially when you're dealing with open source, just having that community backing and the ability to get help when you need it, I think is always a plus for users. Can you talk about the destination? I'm guessing you can have many to many destination, and this is coming from, again, my experience with, not to make it about Stitch here, but with some of the tools, you can have many sources, but just to one destination in a pipeline.
Yeah.
But can you have multiple destinations
Yes.
in this? Okay.
Many. So it's a many to many, and we set up like the UI so that at one point you might have data warehouses as sources. You actually can already. For instance, Snowflake is also a source, and you can have potentially at the end for reverse deal destination Salesforce. So from Snowflake to Salesforce, that's reverse deal, and just at that point at the destination at the connection setting, the settings will be just different at that point. Like because it's not a ELT, it will be reverse deal. The settings will be a bit different, but otherwise that's the goal, many to many. And one thing that could also be interesting to note is that on open source, so demo.airbyte.io is on the open source. Okay, and open source, you can also like import your own connector, your own custom connector. So we see a lot of teams that just take one of our connectors, customize it. At that point, you put like the information where to find the Docker image for that connector, and you'll find it right into the UI after that. You can select it and replicate from it, or they just build a really custom connector using our CDK. Both options are available.
Okay, really
And
good.
yeah,
In what language do teams build those connectors in? Is it just a Python thing, or do you support multiple different languages?
yeah, we support all languages in the sense that those connectors are run into within containers. But I'd say that most of the connectors are built in Python. But for instance, here you'll see we've got a Python CDK. We have a JavaScript CDK. I think we have a Node.js CDK soon. We have a Java destination. You can use whatever language. Yeah.
Okay. And so you can use even Java, and you can get
Yeah.
build your own connector. Okay. And for, you mentioned the connectors run in a Docker container,
Yeah.
and each connector has its own Docker container. Can you talk a little bit about that design the design approach there for having each connector run in its own container? Is that for scalability, or is there something driving that?
It's for, yes, the scalability at play. It's
Mm-hmm.
scalability and flexibility. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a great architecture overview. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the document here. And we use, so if you want to know, we use Temporal like for the scaling jobs. And what is interesting is that also those connectors that you can just leverage them in a config base, like using CLI. So we see a
Mm-hmm.
lot of companies using that not for analytics but for operational use cases, like within their own application at that point.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's really interesting. And just because again, I've had some battle scars in this space. Building connectors is one thing, but instrumentation and monitoring of those connectors at scale is another thing. Do you have any specific recommendations around that? Because I always think about data observability, and if folks are just
Yeah.
building these connectors, are there things you're doing behind the scenes from an operational perspective to make sure those connectors are all solid?
So right now, not yet, but we do intend to. That's something once we've nailed like ELT and we're starting on reverse. I think beginning of 2023, we'll start doing observability features, data quality features, because in the end, everything that is related to data observability is best done at the pipeline level. So we're in a great position to build a better product than the other data observability feature products out there. And we will also want to provide privacy features as well, compliance features, all these kind of features that are on top of the pipeline,
Okay. By that, are you meaning
like
HIPAA,
GDPR compliance or
GDPR, CCPA, and all
exactly,
that? Okay.
exactly.
Um, and then just to get a little bit technical here, on the cloud version of it, do you run on any cloud specifically, or do customers pick what cloud they want from a governance perspective? What, because ultimately data is flowing through your systems. Is there any flexibility in that perspective?
Not right now, but yes, there will be, and there should
Hmm.
be starting in Q4 this year.
Okay, so in Q4 this year. All right.
Yeah, in
So
2022. Yeah.
yeah, so really cool, really cool. Yeah, let's go back into the UI there really quick, and just so we're using the same terms, is it called a pipeline, or do you have different what is it when you have, because I've seen this in different
Yeah.
tools have
Connection between a source connector and a
mhm,
destination connector.
that's a connection.
Yeah.
Okay, because the reason why I asked for that is like DBT also talks about building data pipelines, and I think that's not the same term we're using here.
It could be called pipelines. It is true. I think it's synonymous on our side. Why do we choose connections? I think like it was very close to connectors,
Hmm.
and we called it. We wanted something that worked for streaming, for use cases, and I said like connections worked in our mind, but also pipelines would have worked as well.
Okay, really cool. And then do you want to just touch a little bit on the reverse ETL side of things as well, and how you're supporting that?
So right now we are not, but we have acquired actually 2 months ago Group and
Grouper,
Group
oh,
yeah. And so Group you can see that, as was the open source reverse TL
yeah.
company. And so we will not use Group technology,
Hmm.
but all the team has joined, and yeah, great team. And in the end, they'll help us really build it the right way from the get-go.
Yeah. Oh wow, that's really good, and congrats on that. It's interesting because my team was reaching out to the Grouper to come on board here for a demo, so I don't
Wow.
think they're gonna. I don't think they need
Hope
to do that anymore. Go ahead.
if you want, you can have a demo like when we get it out.
Yeah, yeah. I think that was before the acquisition. So that's very fascinating. So really cool. What's the vision now as the leader and the vision setup for this project? What do you see 3, 5 years out? Where do you see all of this going?
So when you look at our differentiators compared to Fivetran and others, you have customizability and you have long tail. And both of them are very hard to replicate. Like Fivetran will never go fully open source, for instance. And when you look at what is most important to the user base, the first one is reliability. And what is interesting with reliability is that with data integration, it is that it's a 1,000 paper cut problem. We already have a bigger footprint than Fivetran just in 2 years because we're open source. We have a lot more companies
Mhm.
using us. That means we are exposed to a lot more use cases. That means that we have a lot more data to make our connectors stronger than the other can. So we'll be better in the end with reliability. We have second criteria is customizability. Great, we're the best there, and they cannot replicate. And third one is long tail, and they cannot replicate what we're doing. So they'll be stuck as they've been stuck like for a while now, 170 connectors, while we'll have thousands of connectors. So our vision is really to become like the big standard for all data movement. We'll be the only ones with a long tail of ELT, reverse TL, and streaming connectors. That's our goal. So once we become that standard, then the next step is, as you mentioned, data observability, privacy, compliance, or even like discovery potentially. Everything that is on top of the pipeline. That's the whole vision.
Okay, that's a really powerful vision. And two questions here as we bring this home. The logo, that's I couldn't put my finger on what that is. Can you talk a little bit about what we're looking at when we look at that logo?
So it's an octopus moving or a byte flying, either way. Wanted something a bit abstract, but we got like a lot of different interpretation. Like the community, there's even somebody in the community that told us that's a super saiyan flying, but it's actually like an octopus or a byte flying.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go for
Yeah.
that.
And did your team play on there's Airbyte, there's Airtable, there's Airflow. There seems to be a lot of Air stuff going on now. Is that kind of what you're playing on?
So we didn't. Once we realized this afterwards, we just wanted moving and data. And so air is movement and byte data. We did a full day of brainstorming on that. I remember that. And we didn't end up with a good one. And in the night, like in the morning, like we gave that suggestion and everybody was, okay, that's the one. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, we weren't playing with Airflow and Influence. We think Airbyte will be a lot bigger than Airflow in the sense that every company will need a warehouse. And if you need a warehouse, you'll need something like.
Yeah, I think the analogy I've always used is think about the swimming pool, right? If you were to go out and buy a swimming pool, you need the plumbing to get water into that swimming pool. And so this idea of having plumbing to move data around for the different systems, I think is a very powerful space. And the name and the accent, is that French? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm French.
And it was just interesting as I was preparing for this. And I did spend some years at Talent. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yeah.
Bertrand and Fabrice. I think they had some French background. And I did go out to France a couple of times for that. And then Snowflake to Benoit and Thierry, also French. Is there an ecosystem of data going on there that we might be missing here? Or am I just reading too much into that?
So Snowflake's two co-founders are French. Datadog is the same. The two of us are French as well. Yeah, maybe French people are pretty good at data. But yeah, Airbyte is really US based, as Snowflake is, as Datadog is in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thanks very much, John. Where can folks find you? And we're gonna leave the links to all of this in the description below if they want to reach out or talk or have questions. Where can they find you?
They can easily find me on our slack.airbyte.com, and they receive a message. I'll send a message to all new community members, so they can chat with me there.
All right, that's very awesome, John. Thank you so much. I think this was very informative. I learned a lot. This is a space that I think the data revolution was seeing is really predicated on folks moving data, and I think that it seems like your team is doing some amazing work here and with Airbyte. We're gonna leave the links to all of this in the description below. And just to leave the audience here, someone once said the most expensive thing you can do with data is to move data around. And so companies always have to think twice or think really well about how they move that data and making sure that the solutions they choose gives them the flexibility in terms of connectors and also reliability to get that data moving. So thank you for sharing that with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for
All
having
right.
me.
All right. Thanks, John.
Okay, bye-bye.